Hey everybody, Penelope and I are here to talk a little bit about stress. Quincy's down here too. Quincy, you want to come up here and say hello? Yeah, he does. Here's Quincy, so you can say hello to Quincy. Yeah, Quincy, he's a big boy. He's the biggest boy in the house. All 16 pounds of him. So, we're having a ball up here doing these for all of us. So, let's talk about stress. Stress kills, that's something to bear in mind, but not necessarily. Some people feel that stress motivates. So there's a wide range of opinions about stress. What are we going to define stress as? Well, any circumstance experiences threatening your well-being, taxing your ability to cope. Right? What does stress do for us, though? And stress is adaptive, and taking an evolutionary perspective, stress can get us off the dime and get us busy. Right? The human stress response to perceived threats, and notice it can be perceived threats. They don't have to be actual threats. Any stimuli that we perceive as a threat is enough to activate a stress response. And it activates thoughts, feelings, behaviors, physiological arousal, the big four, right, that normally promote adaptation and survival. And this is the point of stress, is that stress not only kills, but stress also saves. And let's get into the differences there. The pros and cons: stress saves, stress weakens and kills. Take your pick, right? So we're driven to explore my favorite word, a word that you're always safe to use in my class. If I ever ask you a question and you want to answer depends, you're good to go, man. That's an acceptable answer, right? But what's the danger of answering depends? What do you think I'm going to ask you after you say depends? Yeah, depends on what? So that's the danger of using the word depends. And what do we got here? We have what might be considered a stress-evoking situation. Now, we have a bear munching on that guy's legs. We have his two buddies trying to distract the bear to get him off his buddy. And obviously, this is a horrible Photoshop, so you should know that by now. And also, no animals were hurt in the creation of this lecture. I think that's another caveat that we should produce right there. But note what happens here and why I'm using this image. That bear is going to finish this business within a couple minutes. So 2 to 3 minutes, that guy's going to be dead, or he's going to somehow break free and get away. And that's what's going to happen. But it's all going to happen very quickly. This is our normal animal stress response. Animal is human, right? Stress response, it's meant to activate and be done with in a couple minutes. Either we got the hell out of the bear's mouth and we survive and we can begin to relax, or we get eaten by the bear and it really doesn't matter anymore. Maybe to our friends, maybe to the bear, but not to us ourselves. So the problem with our human stress response is that we often find ourselves in circumstances that aren't over in 2 or 3 minutes, but are protracted, and this is where the real danger comes. So I want to keep that in mind as we move through this lecture. I got this big ass model here, and really the big take home here, I don't want to belabor it too much, but I do want to kind of explain it to a certain extent. There are resources we have for dealing with stress, or not. The presence of resources makes the dealing with stress easier, right? If I'm hungry and kind of stressed because I'm hungry, well, easy enough because we have a full refrigerator. So we have the resources to deal with the stressor, right? If we have to kind of shelter at home because of COVID, you know, my wife and I have a decent house here. It's comfortable. We put on a good roof. We replaced our central air conditioning. So the stress of being confined to the home, we have technology, isn't as bad as it could be for someone else, right? Because we have resources. If I feel that maybe something's wrong with me, I have a pain, well, I have medical insurance and I have a doctor. So the stress doesn't achieve the same level because I have resources to deal with it. Now, down at the bottom here, so these are the different types of resources, and it might be physical, money, personal, coping style. Maybe I'm an optimist. That helps me cope with stress, right? But the stressors can be varied as well. So it can be an environmental stressor, loud noise next door, or a psychological stressor, indecision, anxiety, guilt, right? It could be a social stressor about getting together with people that I maybe don't know or don't like, right? And so the type of stressor could matter, and we react differently to different types of stressors. The dimensions of the stressor become pretty critical. How potent a stressor is it? That is, what is this level of intensity? What is the duration? Is it like the bear attack that's going to be over in 2 minutes? Or is it like going into college and struggling for 4 years to attain a degree? That's a long-term stressor, right? How often does the stressor come? What rate is it? Is it a monthly, rent payment that's due? And how often? And then the predictability is a big thing. We don't like unpredictability. Human beings, that causes us anxiety for the most part, all else being equal. Is it predictable or unpredictable? And the rent, again, as an example, the rate is like 12 months, once every month. That's the frequency, and it's predictable. But heading off to school in your car and having your car break down, leave the transmission sitting there on the pavement, that's an unpredictable stressor. And notice that, oh my God, how am I going to deal with this? What is it going to cost? So all these elements then kind of combine, interact to, in fact, present us with different types of stressors. Now this big box here is about the person. And this is us. This is a story of us. So, to what extent am I healthy or not healthy? To what extent am I vulnerable to diseases? To what extent is my mind in pretty good shape? My temperament appropriate to dealing with stress or not, right? Am I laid back or am I uptight? What about my self-concept? How do I view myself? Do I view myself as someone who's robust and able to deal with stress, or do I view myself as someone who's relatively weak, being ready to be blown over by even the most minute stressor, right? And then what are the cultural characteristics? I've been raised to face stress, cave into stress. What does my culture say about it? So look at the three pieces, and that's what I'm really talking about, is the big picture. The resources and the stressors connect to us via this fancy-ass term called cognitive appraisal. Cognitive appraisal is thinking about it. Hey, what is the nature of this stressor? So this is, I'm computing what this stressor means and what it is, right? This is, I'm computing what resources I have to deal with the stressor. That all combines with who I am, and then leads to the possible reactions to the stressor. And those reactions, as we said in the earlier slide, can include a physiological response, that is maybe a quickening of the heart rate, perspiring, whatever it is, that behavioral response, lashing out, withdrawing, the subjective feelings, and that could be also labeled emotion, but I think it's a little broader than that because it could also be mood. And then the cognitive response, what I think about the stressor, right? So cognitive appraisal becomes all important. What we think about the stressor and what we think about our resources for dealing with it are critical. And notice, those are somewhat under our control. Not totally, necessarily, given whatever it is, but somewhat. So, and before you think I'm a total sexist, remember that, my dedication of this course is to Dr. Kaufman, to Carolyn Kaufman, and she gave me all her materials, and this is one of her pictures that she included in her lecture. So I just love it. I love the 1950s imagery. I just think it's funny. Now, when we look at cognitive appraisal, those two arrows, there's really two cognitive appraisals that can take place. The primary appraisal is to assess the stressor directly for threat. How threatening is this? So I look at that bear and say, is this super threatening, mildly threatening? If it's a bear, it's one thing. If it's a bee, it's another. You leave Lucy alone. Cat's going berserk down there. All right. The secondary appraisal is, do I have the resources? So notice the primary appraisal was the arrow that probably rested on the bottom of that diagram, and the upper arrow was more of the secondary appraisal. Both appraisals will likely be made when we encounter a stressor. Right? So let's move on, talk a little more here about physical and psychological symptoms of stress. And when we look at what people report, when people are under stress, majority of people talk about fatigue, right? And this also a headache, upset stomach or indigestion. So you can kind of go down the list and see what in fact applies to you. Now, the psychological, that's the physical symptoms. There's also psychological symptoms like irritability or anger. And we know that sometimes when we're stressed, we might have a pretty short fuse and lash out under circumstances that don't necessarily warrant it. We may lose interest. We may lack energy or become amotivated, right? We might feel nervous or anxious, feeling depressed or sad, feeling though you could cry. And isn't it interesting that these are all psychological responses to stress, and we may differ. We might have tremendous individual differences in which is more likely for us to experience, but it might also be dictated somewhat by the stressor. So, potential sources of stress then. What is Kyle going to tell us about this? Kyle is one of those kind of cats. Notice he's got a hell of a mustache, doesn't he? And what do they call cats with the little mustache? Yeah, they actually, if you Google Kittler, K-I-T-L-E-R, you will get literally hundreds of pictures of cats that kind of look like Kyle. So, regardless, Kyle says daily hassles. So just the daily hassles, right? One thing that stresses me out, I know it's going to sound really stupid, but it's like I want to go record lectures, and I'm eager to go record lectures, and I go, oh, but I have to set everything up. I can't leave all this shit out, or the cats will destroy it. So when I set this stuff up, it's time to get busy. It's time to set down the lectures, and then it's time to tear it all down before the cats tear it all down, right? So daily hassles, washing dishes, whatever it is, right? Life changes, and I got a little more on that for you, so we'll get there. Acculturation, having to adjust to a new culture. And I think sometimes we forget how difficult it is when we look at our international students coming to Ohio State. They've got a whole nother layer of complexity and stressors on them acculturating to this place we call Ohio in the United States, right? Pain and discomfort. And that can be chronic pain and discomfort, can be amazingly stressful. Frustration is a big time stressor. Conflict, it can be workplace conflict, relation conflict, it could be classroom conflict, whatever it is. We're kind of existing under this umbrella of conflict now, political conflict, probably like we've never seen before in recent history. You can go back to the Vietnam era, and there's a lot of protests and a lot of conflict then. But I think it's even different now. Don't quote me on that because it's hard to know. I was a teenager during Vietnam. I'm almost a senior now during the current conflict, so maybe my perspective skews my ability to compare the two. Irrational beliefs. And this is going to tie to an assignment later on as well via Albert Ellis. Type A behavior patterns. So how many of you consider yourself type A? Achievers, perfectionists, right? These folks have a greater stress response than people who are type B, who are essentially laid back. And environmental stressors, as we described as well. So this continuum of stressors then, that's a different type of stressors, but stressors vary, right, in their intensity as we looked on the big diagram. And minor inconveniences we can put down here at the low end, right, nothing really, oh my God, I forgot to take something out for dinner, what am I going to do now? We'll talk about a problem that isn't really that much of a problem, but it'll present itself as a minor stressor, right? But then some things can be totally traumatic and life-changing, right? Life-altering. So hassles are usually minor irritations or frustrations. It's another way to put it. It's a hassle. But traumatic stressors can be defined as situations that threaten one's physical safety, okay? Arouse feelings of fear, horror, and or helplessness. And we've got more on helplessness via Martin Seligman later in the course. Now, daily hassles and uplifts. Daily hassles are a routine source of annoyance or aggravation, right, that have a negative impact on health, and it's kind of a cumulative impact. Uplifts are regularly occurring enjoyable experiences. So one of the things we do with the cats, I love it. And my wife, she's kind of mixed bag on this, but Come 8 p.m., it's time for us to go from the downstairs up here to the attic, and everyone comes up. We come up. All the cats come up. Not all the cats, but most of the cats come up, and we do what's called treat time. And we bust out the cat treats, and the cats form themselves in a semicircle around us, and we give them treats. This started like 7 or 8 years ago. I'm not even sure how it started, but now we have to do it. And if we don't do it, the cats will kill us. I'm convinced. I mean, about 7:15, 7:30 downstairs, they all start to congregate, and they're all kind of circulating, looking at us, and it's like, you guys better get ready and go upstairs because it's treat time. They don't let us skip that ever. I love it. To me, it's our familial bonding time, right? So it's an uplift for me. It might be a bit of a hassle for my wife at times, right? But that's just a different approach. So, do you spend more time then with the people around you sharing hassles or creating uplifts? And part of this course is about getting outside of ourselves and doing for others. And we'll see that especially when we get to the lecture on the self. But imagine that you have the power to make someone's day better, which you do for so many people. Do you then use that power? Do you create uplifts in other people's lives, or do you essentially share? And I'm not saying you can't talk negative shit to other people. Of course, you're going to suffer pain, you're going to suffer hassles, you're going to suffer stress, and it's good to get it out and discuss it with other people. But what is the ratio? And think about how people perceive you and might want to be around you or might avoid you on the perception of this. Right? Oh my God, all they ever do is complain. And then that kind of diminishes a person's popularity around others. Whereas, my God, every time, and Dr. Beers said this to me, and I thought it was a wonderful compliment. And she said, Mark, you know, I enjoy going and getting a cup of coffee with you or meeting with you because you're so affirming. And it's a technique I learned a long time ago to affirm people, to point out the good that they do and make sure that they understand it and know it because they feel better as a result of it. And what happens when you make people feel better? They want you around more often, right? If you're reading Dale Carnegie for your self-help book, this is a lesson I learned from reading Dale Carnegie. And remember, those self-help books, I'm not saying they don't have good advice, but it might not be empirically supported. So we need to understand the difference. Now, life changes, as I said, can be the source of tremendous stress. And most changes require some level of adaptation. And we know that Charles Darwin said, you know, the key is adaptability. And so to what extent can we adapt? And it can create various levels of stress and or anxiety. While hassles are negative, changes can be positive or negative. But the weird thing is, it doesn't matter whether change is positive. With it still comes anxiety. I was anxious as hell when I got accepted to graduate school, and my wife and I finally, in Anaheim, California, packed up our 2 cars and drove from Anaheim to Disneyland to Columbus. 4 days on the road, right? We only had 3 cats then and 2 dogs. It was a great trip, or not. But man, and it's for a good thing because I'm going to graduate school, right? But it's stressful as hell, right? So positive can equal. So can potential stress be measured by quantifying life changes? Well, it may be. Now, Holmes and Rahe developed what they called the social readjustment rating scale. And what they did is they listed a bunch of common stressors and then they attempted to give them a point value. And the idea was that you look at this scale and you give yourself X number of points corresponding to the stressor you've experienced, the event you've experienced in the last year. So, how many people think it's stressful to find a job? And I've had to do that numerous times in my life, and it can be amazingly stressful, right? Many of you have probably gone through that more than once, and you might be going through it right now. Let me ask you about this. Marriage time. Most people report that planning a wedding is insanely stressful, and worrying about the wedding and where I'm going to get the money for the wedding, right? And that's stressful. But it's a good thing because we're getting married and we're going to spend our lives together, and yet it's stressful, right? And then what happens? Uh-oh. This little guy pops out, right, in some circumstances or becomes adopted. I was adopted, so let's make this child adopted, right? And then that's stressful. So And once you get married and you have the kid, you probably need some new digs. So you got to go find a place. Anyone looking for an apartment or buying a house stressful? Insanely stressful, right? And then you got to move. Who finds moving stressful? And can you imagine the poor students? Let's think about this. Who are coming to campus, stressful enough because that's a change of environment. I'm going to move into the dorm. I'm going to move onto campus, off-campus housing, whatever. And then their school decides, oh my God, the quarantine didn't work. COVID's out of control. We got hot spots. We got to close this shit down, and everyone's got to go home. The amount of stress that creates. Right? So, all in all, when we succumb to too much stress and it overwhelms us, maybe we end up in front of this guy seeking a different life path. Just a joke, right? Okay, so you can do this for yourself. You got the lecture slides available to you, and you can calculate your own stress score. So in the last year, have you had death of a spouse? Then you give yourself 100 points. Did you divorce? Right? You give yourself 73 points. If you divorced twice in the last year, probably not, but you give yourself 73 times 2. So it's for each one of these occurrences over the last year. And you can see retirement. Stressful. What am I going to do with myself? Right? I start thinking about that now. I'm not that far out from it. Sexual difficulties, major business readjustment, death of a close friend is a 37. Change in responsibilities, that could be home, work, whatever. That's up to you to classify. There's a second page. There's a lot of stressors. And notice, minor violation of the law only earns 11 points. Christmas or holiday observance. How many people find Christmas? Getting prepared for Christmas, shopping for Christmas, maybe visiting some relatives that aren't on the top of your visit list. Add them up. And what do you get? If you're less than 150, minor stress. 150 to 199, mild stress. 200 to 299, moderate stress. 300, major stress. What's the deal on this?